Hi there, welcome to this week's Get Me Right, your favorite deep dive show on stories contemporary and consequential for India. This week, I picked three, two domestic and one purely from foreign affairs, but of equal consequence for you and me and our country. One, we take a look at this week's G7 summit that concluded with a whimper. G7 began as an elite group with considerable power to influence world events, but has shrunk to a talk shop with little impact. The factors behind this increasing irrelevance is going to be our focus. Two, this week marked entry of 5 foreign universities into India. They would be setting up campuses here so that students can get same degree, but without the hassle of visas, racism, foreign exchange outflow, and hordes of issues that go with a foreign education. And finally, we would connect the dots between an announcement made by India this week that we might be sitting on a Guyana-sized oil reserves in the Andaman Sea and the energy security implications of the ongoing Middle East conflict, given that almost 2/3 of India's oil and gas come from this geography. Let's get going.
The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in, and I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in, and you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago, but it didn't work out that way. But it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 8 years ago, it switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake. Even though I wasn't in politics then, I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table, so it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't have had the war. Other than that, I think we're going to accomplish a lot, and I expect to. And I think our primary focus will be trade, and trade with Canada, and I'm sure we can work something out.
This was Donald Trump, just being Donald Trump, trashing the group of 7 or G7 for having failed to prevent the war in Europe. Not only that, he put the entire onus on the grouping for chucking out Russia in 2014. Trump has a point. If you want to negotiate with somebody, you need that somebody on the table, which Putin of Russia, of course, is not. While it's a little more complicated than that, Trump got his facts wrong. For example, it was not Trudeau who was Canadian PM in 2014, it was Stephen Harper, and Russia was chucked out because it annexed the then Ukrainian territory of Crimea in breach of international law. But then we digress. The leaders of G7 are a bunch who believe or fancy their centrality to the rest of the world. They met this week in the alpine resort of Kanana Skis in Alberta, province of Canada, for 3 days to deliberate on the geopolitics and geoeconomics of the day. This time also, from the AI revolution to quantum computing, from forest wildfires to migrant smuggling, from the war in Europe to the one in the Middle East, they opined on everything under the sun, like they did a year before or the year before that, but no impact. G7 used to set the agenda and rest of us would follow. Not anymore. That Trump's soundbite is indicative of the failure. Before we understand why, a short history. G7 was formed in 1975 to respond to the first oil shock. The history is a little more complex and goes back to 1973 or earlier. But let's keep things simple here. In response to the 1973 Yom Kippur War, or the 6-day war by Israel on its neighbors, the oil-producing Arab states put an embargo disrupting global supplies. Parallelly, there was the Nixon shock, economic turbulence due to some policy decisions of the Richard Nixon administration, not dissimilar from the Trump tantrums now, affecting global trade. Taken together, the world economy hit recession and went into a tailspin. World Bank and the IMF failed to tide over the crisis. It was a moment of reckoning for the first world. The 6 advanced economies of that time, USA, UK, West Germany, France, Italy, and Japan, met in France to tide over the crisis. They released a 15-point charter calling for free trade, multilateralism, rapprochement with the Soviet Russia-dominated Eastern Bloc, and a dialogue with the developing Third World. Since money is power, geoeconomic also became geopolitical. And so the G6 became an influential voice of the rich and the powerful with a dime to share. In 1976, they included Canada, making it G7. Russia was brought into the fold in 1998, more as an outreach to the Eastern Bloc than as an economy or democracy of consequence. This became G8. There were some visible efforts, giving money to build a shelter over the Chernobyl reactor, starting the debt restructuring program for the poorest 42 nations of the world in the 1990s. G8 also shepherded the formation of the G20 in 1999, effectively becoming the Global Economic Council. Criticism started building in. The group had a clear Eurocentrism, but for Japan, it was more an alliance of the transatlantic consensus between America and Europe. 90% of the population was excluded. While it sought to champion liberal democracy, the group by itself was distant from any democratic structure, more a clique of the rich. The 2008 global financial crisis unraveled the aura, when the G7 finance ministers concluded in exasperation that individual nation-states had to devise their own plans to deal with it. The group lost face, if not credibility. From the shadows emerged the G20, which is proving to be a more effective and democratic arrangement to oversee the world economic order. It has the heft of both population size and GDP. Against G7's 10% population, G20, or 21 now, including the African Union, has 85% of the world population covered. In terms of GDP, G21 accounts for 80% against G7's 45%. And while they lag in per capita terms on most parameters, the non-G7 member states of G21 taken together have almost equal heft in terms of economic weight. Once a symbol of strategic unity, it now presents a picture of internal dissent and discord. Look at these pictures. Giorgia Meloni's eye roll at French President Macron went viral. Trump talked down Macron through this post. Then this wink of PM Mark Carney of Canada while seemingly mocking Trump. Trump himself has had a bouncy relationship with G7, to say the least. In his first term, he crashed out of the meeting after being called out for his tariffs that were against the free trade position of the grouping. This time, Trump again cut short his visit, ostensibly to oversee America's involvement in the Israel-Iran war, even as the rest of the leaders were calling for restraint and de-escalation. The free trade agenda lies in tatters. At the summit venue, Trump and Keir Starmer showcased a UK-US trade deal. Everyone is negotiating individual agreements with everyone else. The World Trade Organization lies in tatters. Ironically, if there's one nation still talking about a global trade regime, it's China. Though, of course, Beijing too is busy cutting deals. If 2008 crisis was the beginning of the unraveling by the COVID crisis in 2020, G7 had completely ceded control to G20 and even the Quad, both groupings in which India is a member. The fact that India has been invited to last 7 of G7 summits on the trot is indicative of our growing heft as an economy of consequence. More examples of G7 in crisis. In April last year, G7 decided to phase out coal as a source of energy by the 2030-2035 window. Same year, Germany returned back to coal, facing shortages due to the Nord Stream collapse. Earlier this year, at the Munich Security Conference, US Vice President J.D. Vance hectored and harangued Europe. The transatlantic consensus is broke, so is G7. Once a symbol of strategic unity, G7 now reflects deep internal contradictions on trade, tariffs, climate, energy, and security.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
Only on China, perhaps, there might be consensus still, but that too stops at diagnosing the malaise.
It is a challenge we all have a crucial stake in, because all G7 countries are facing aggressive trade practices from non-market economies, from industrial overcapacity to weaponizing economic dependencies. These practices must be addressed. And because they affect all of us, we must respond together and bring an end to the era of globalism without guardrails. So, we must diversify and strengthen our supply chains and raw materials. To this end, we will discuss closer cooperation on critical minerals among trusted partners. We must tackle distortions in other key sectors, steel, for example, or pharmaceutical products, and we must counter together non-market policies and practices.
Ursula von der Leyen used strongest words yet on China, but each G7 nation is cutting its own deals with Beijing. Trump even said at the same venue that the United States has an excellent relationship with Xi Jinping. G7 is dead. Long live G7. Moving on for now to the second one.
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do.
This 5 seconds of Trump's soundbite last week on his vacillation about whether he would order an American military strike against Iran had the impact of a mild tremor across world's energy markets. Oil prices zoomed, and India's basket price shot up to $76 to a barrel. Just for comparison, this was $64 last month. That's an upward move of $12 or roughly 20% in just 1 month. The impact of Israel's war on Iran is already visible on India's energy security. While it is still not a supply-side crisis, only a price shock, things could change if Trump decides in the affirmative on joining forces on the side of Israel. A fear being talked about is the disruption of supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Seen in the pictures here, it lies between Oman and Iran and links the Persian Gulf in the north to the Gulf of Oman to the south and the Arabian Sea beyond. At its narrowest point, it is 33 kilometers wide, with the shipping sea lane further constricted to just 3 kilometers. About 1/5 of the total oil consumed in the world passes through this narrow stretch of water. That's roughly 20 million barrels of crude every day. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait use the strait for their oil, mainly to Asia. Almost 100% of the Qatari gas, LNG, flows through Hormuz. In our case, of our total imports, which are 90% of all our energy needs anyway, roughly half come via this strait. Just to give an idea of what a blockade of this waterway can mean, it has happened only once in history, was done collectively by the Arab states in 1973 to punish the Western backers of Israel in response to the Yom Kippur War. The blockade resulted in the first oil shock that sent the global economy into recession. Things have changed since then. For one, Iran threatens often but has never acted on them insofar as blockading Hormuz is concerned. Two, from being world's biggest importer of oil, the United States of America has transformed into one of the top exporters now. Drill, baby, drill was one of the campaign slogans of Trump this term. As a consequence, 85% of the crude passing the Strait of Hormuz was meant for Asian markets, with India, China, Japan, and South Korea accounting for 2/3 of that. The geography is volatile, and there have been episodes of disruptions. In 2012, for example, Iran threatened to block the strait after US and Europe imposed tough sanctions. In 2019, 4 vessels, including 2 Saudi tankers, were attacked off the UAE coast. Jamming of signals during ongoing conflict is leading to delays and disruptions. The global energy markets are closely watching the developments around the world's most crucial choke point on oil and gas. If direct entry of USA makes Iran face an existential threat, then it might order a blockade after all. It is in this backdrop that the news went below the headlines threshold but has great positive consequences for India's overall energy security. Petroleum Minister Hardeep Puri made a big announcement claiming India had hit a jackpot of black gold in the Andaman Sea off the eastern seaboard. Listen to him first.
Potential that we have in terms of known reserves is quite high. We have something like 42 billion oil and gas, 42 billion tons of oil and gas equivalent. We have the potential of several Guyanas in the Andaman Ocean. And I also said that we are looking at the possibility, thanks to this additional exploration and production, of finding a Guyana.
Couple of points. This is not immediate. This is prospective discovery of potential reserves which might translate into actual oil on tap in a decade or more. The minister mentioned Guyana as a story we might end up following. The South American nation, sandwiched between Venezuela, Brazil, and Suriname on 3 sides, and the Atlantic on the 4th, struck oil and gas in 2015. It is only now that oil has started flowing for commercial extraction and export. But it has already done wonders. From a GDP of $4 billion when oil discovery happened, it now stands at $26 billion, or a rise of 600% in a decade. The oil find catapulted Guyana into a rich oil state in a decade, as it stands as 17th in terms of oil reserves. If Puri is right, we in India could rocket into a middle-income country, which we are still not, despite becoming the 4th largest economy over a decade after the oil starts flowing from Andaman blocks. While the minister underscored all efforts that are going into making this a reality, we should say fingers crossed and pray that it happens soon. That brings me to the 3rd segment, also connected with India's growth march.
This milestone exemplifies the spirit of Sankalpa se Siddhi, the journey from resolution to realization. It strengthens our shared goal of empowering youth and enabling innovation-led growth through education leading to Vikasit Bharat. I congratulate the leadership of all 5 universities, the government of Maharashtra, SIDCO, UGC, and other agencies.
This was another story that went below the radar of news cycle, but is of consequence for the future grooming of our youth. India just announced setting up of campuses by 5 foreign universities, making international education available at home. Come to think of it, while global standards of education were available at the school level through the IB, ISCE, and Cambridge courses, at the university level one had to fork out hundreds of thousands of dollars for international degrees. A simple tweak in the national education policy of 2020 made it possible to get a foreign degree right here in India. One can still say that it does not match the experience of a foreign campus in the United States or the UK. But for millions who could not afford or access such an education, minus the international campus, also this should be a good deal. Let me explain a few benefits to students. You get a foreign university degree with a curricula at par with what the same universities are offering in their home countries. You get it at a much lesser price point. You are not going to feel homesick. There are no visa issues, no racism to handle. These universities hopefully would bring in foreign faculty so the overall standards would improve. From the point of view of parents, they can see their ward get a world-class experience with home advantage. I see 2 more very distinct advantages. One, to our education system. With the infusion of pedagogy and curricula of these global universities, the overall ecosystem of education in India would likely become more competitive. One can expect salaries of our own teachers to increase to match those of the foreign faculty. 2, and a very important one, we would be saving forex reserves to the tune of anything between $70 to 80 billion annually. Here's the math. India has over 1.8 million or 18 lakh students pursuing higher education abroad. About half of them are concentrated in 5 countries: the United States, Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, and Germany. In the USA, average tuition fee for a science course is upwards of $32,000 per annum. Add to it living expenses that include housing, transport, food, etc. That should be about $30,000 per annum. With miscellaneous expenses on books, periodicals, insurance, and recreation, that should be upwards of $70,000 for studying in the United States. The numbers could vary in other countries, as seen in the graphics. Still, calculating conservatively, India pays not less than $70 to 80 billion per annum from its foreign exchange reserves for these 1.8 million students to get a foreign degree. For sure, not all of it, but a good sum can be saved if foreign universities set up campuses across India. The picture is improving fast and yet is not flattering. In the World University Rankings released this week, with our best performance in over a decade, we have 54 of our higher education institutions in the list of World Top 1500. While this is a big jump from just 11 in the year 2014, when India joined this ranking system, it is still a long way to go. None of India's 54 are in top 100 this year. China has 5, while the United States has 32 of its universities in the top 100. Goes without saying, if some of those set up their satellite campuses in India, recruit both locally and globally, and if our students can take advantage of their cutting-edge education system at a fraction of a cost and without the visa hassles, it's a win-win for all. Another drawback of Indian campuses is the international students ratio, which is much lower than world standards and consistently going down, which means that not enough foreign students are interested in an Indian degree. Also, in terms of the faculty-student ratio, none of our 54 universities on the list are even in top 500. This is an area which might get addressed naturally, with foreign campuses acting as catalyst for overall quality improvement. This step should facilitate a two-way flow of ideas and talent. My personal takeaway is that this should act as a catalyst and bring competition and improve overall college education and research environment in the country. The cross-pollination of ideas would make for a healthy rise in standards. Thanks for watching.